Hi everyone, my name is Professor Jason Gulia and I'm a professor in the English department. I'm incredibly excited to talk to everyone today about revolutionary Age of Reason or Enlightenment literature. So this is from 1750 to 1800 in colonial America and the soon-to-be United States. In this lecture, I'm going to walk you through the basics of some of the things going on in the world at the time. Secondly, some of the trends and themes coming out of those events. And thirdly, how literature and writing fits into that larger picture. My goal is going to be as general as possible while giving you an introduction to some of the questions and concerns that dominated the period. Then you should be able to apply whatever text your professor have chosen to some of these questions and concerns. So of course, I'm going to leave a lot of information out. After all, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, our period includes two of the most famous revolutions in world and American history, the American Revolution and the French Revolution. But at the end, on the very last slide, I will give you some sources you can use just in case you're curious and want to find out more. So I'm just going to dive in and talk about what's going on in the world, and I'm just going to give you the Spark Notes versions of some of the most important events. This is just so you can get a sense of just how chaotic and important this period is. So, first main event. From 1754 to 1763, there was the French and Indian War. Do not be fooled by the name. This conflict was actually between the British colonies and the French colonies in the territories that include the present-day United States, Canada, and Mexico. Now, during the 1700s and earlier, claiming land was tremendously important and competitive. It's important to remember that during this time, land meant power. Claiming land for your mother country meant more people, more resources, and more money that you could send back. Now, if you take a look at the map that's going to pop up now on the right side, you can get a sense of just how things were in the 1750s. So the French colonists in blue, right here on the map, had spread down into the center of the territory, so the present-day United States. The English colonists, in this pink color over here, had taken the Northeast, and the Spanish colonists, in orange here and here, had taken present-day Florida, over here, and had come up from present-day Mexico. This naturally led to tension. And then things get even worse in about 1749 when the French colonists launch an expedition into the territory claimed by the British colonists. So they go into the Northeast. This caused a series of battles, and by the time we get to the 1750s, an all-out war between the British colonists, the French colonists, and their home countries. Now, the British colonies would eventually win in 1763 and take much of what remained of, quote, New France, which had been developed by the French colonists in the present-day Americas. The other thing I want you to keep in the back of your mind is the Industrial Revolution. Now, this is an ongoing process in which people started to pay more and more attention to technological progress. As you can see, it's from 1760 to 1840, so it starts during our period, but it by no means ends during that period. Now, by the time we get to the middle of the 1700s, people really understood that becoming more technologically advanced was one of the key ways to win over other countries. If you had better technology, you have a stronger economy, a stronger military, healthier citizens, etc. So the period from 1760 to 1840 is known as the Industrial Revolution. So this is a time period when scientists and others really committed to learning better technology. You can actually think, and I believe this is useful, you can think of this as the moment when we see the seeds of the modern technological landscape. So now we demand more and more technologically advanced computers, apps, and cell phones on an everyday basis. We run out and we get the newest iPhone or the newest Android or whatever we're interested in. Now, in many ways, this focus on technology and machines comes directly from the Industrial Revolution that begins during this period. Now, be a little bit more specific, people were working to improve fields such as medicine. This was a big thing. We started to see people focusing on getting better, being healthier, improving artillery. Now, if you had better guns, if you had better ammunition, if you had better cannons than the enemy, you had an advantage. They also worked on improving transportation. This is the period when the steamboat is starting to be developed, improved, and eventually perfected. They were working on anything, and this kind of ties everything together. Anything that would improve their national economy. If you had better science, if you were more advanced, this helped you in all kinds of ways. They were also figuring out what jobs could be done by machines instead of people. So this is one way of tying everything together. Machines made things more efficient and sometimes safer. The next event is the American Revolution. So, immediately after the French and Indian War, both the British colonists and the French people, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, would participate in revolutions against their monarchies. The American colonies had become angrier about how they were being treated by the British government. Not only were the colonies sending over a lot of resources to Britain, but they did not have any representation in the British government. We might remember from past classes the famous cry, "No taxation without representation." The American colonies wanted a say about whether they were being taxed and how much. By 1765, the colonists had decided they didn't need a king to rule at all. They could do it all on their own. So, they formally declared their independence from the British monarchy in 1776, and by 1783, with the help of the French, they had won the war and become their own country. And on the page, you have at the top an image of an American battlefield with the general in the middle, and then on the bottom, the image of signing the Declaration of Independence in 1776. So the last main event I want to talk quickly about is the French Revolution. So several years after the American Revolution, the French government would have their own trouble with their subjects. French citizens looked at the American Revolution as a kind of pattern. They asked themselves, and you can imagine this, if the American colonists didn't have to live under a monarchy, why do we? So in 1789, the French people declare their ruling monarchy unfair and tyrannical. After a series of horrific battles, the French people actually win the war and set up their own government. I also think it's important to note that this new government would eventually become a dictatorship under Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, the image included on the right side of your screen is one of the most iconic ones of the period. This really captures the idea that the uprising against the French monarchy was led by and won by the people. So that's a lot of information. Now, what are some of the trends and themes that come out of this history? I think we can actually boil down the events of the period to a few major trends and themes. The first is the individual versus the social. During this period, people were really wondering about some incredibly important questions. They asked themselves questions like, should I think for myself, or should I rely on the knowledge of those around me? They also asked themselves, where does my knowledge come from? Does it come from my individual experience instead of from past society or from God? This time period was also filled with questions about authority and whether it was trustworthy. And specifically, the period was interested in the importance of monarchies. Both the American colonists and the French people were wondering if they could trust their rulers to be fair. But more broadly, people were thinking about how much they should really trust any carriers of authority. These included tradition, myths, superstition, and even religion. People were really starting to question whether it was better to rely more on what they could see and observe and feel than on what they had been told. The third major trend was a focus on rationality and reason. With everything going on, and you can see how the history matters, people were wondering if the best way to create a fulfilling life was to dare to think rationally for themselves. This is why this period is so commonly called the Age of Reason. I will also say quickly that these themes were certainly not new. They had been around for a long time. But during this time period, they took on a great deal of urgency. And we can see how this period starts to get us to the modern period and the postmodern period, where we focus on rationality and we focus on technology. So how does writing fit into all of this? I'm actually just going to give you some very quick info here. So writing during this period often directly took up some of the questions and concerns from the previous section. So for example, and I'm just going to give you a couple of them, there are a lot of them, but one of them is in 1776, Thomas Paine publishes Common Sense. Now in this book, Paine blames many of the troubles in the American colonies on the King of England. Then, and this is your second example, in 1783, a man named Noah Webster publishes Grammatical Institute of the English Language. The idea here is that creating American rules of grammar is a huge way to declare ourselves independent from the British monarchy or the British government. The result is one of the first American dictionaries. Now, in addition to these two books, and again, they're two of many, and your professor will likely have some others that they will have you take a look at. So in addition to these two books, many poets, playwrights, and early novelists write in ways that specifically think about the importance of individual thought, the problems that sometimes come with authority figures, and the focus on reason. I know I just gave you a lot of information in about 13 minutes. I gave you a lot of information about this period in American history and literature, but if you have any interest in finding out more, and in locating some other books, stories, etc. that might help you think about the period from 1750 to 1800, I am attaching two websites here. The first is the Library of Congress's entry for this period. You can click on it, you can poke around, they have some ideas of some important books and stories. The second is from an article done by the Encyclopedia Britannica. And here again, you can poke around and they have some ideas of the most important things being written during this time period. That's it. I hope you enjoyed the lecture and learned something new about this period.